And good morning. We welcome in Pat McGuigan with CapitolBeatOK.com. And Pat, we want to start off today and talk about Congressman James Lankford. He's been on the job now for a little less than 6 months. You've spoken with a number of times. What are his views of D.C. so far, and what is he working on going forward?
He's pretty much the same guy that was elected. You know, he's focused on debt, and more debt, and he's serious about that. It's what he said he was going to worry about, and that's what he's worrying about, and that's what he's working hard on. The most interesting thing about James Lankford, in a lot of ways, is his consistency. He's home this weekend. Stopped by a power generation facility in Kanawha. Spent time with constituents in Oklahoma City on Friday, and doing some more of that over the rest of the weekend before he has to continue with his work. Lankford is one of the most intriguing political figures I've ever seen. You know, a year ago, he absolutely was not on the radar screen.
Not at all.
He had filed, of course, but he was not on the radar screen as a potential victor. And here he is. He's congressman. He's carving out a niche. My goodness, he's on the budget committee, and that's big right now. He's been one of the defenders of the process the Republicans are trying to work on Medicare, pushing back against what the Republicans call Metascare and what the Democrats call, you know, protecting health care for Americans. So there's differing views there. But he says if there's no reform of Medicare and of Social Security, there won't be Medicare and Social Security in another few years. And that's a much more plausible position than it was when some conservative analysts reached those conclusions 25 years ago or 20 years ago. That is now a very plausible view given the state of the economy and the state of those two systems. He also is chairman of Oversight and Government Reform Subcommittee, and he concentrates, interestingly enough, on almost highly technical kind of computer nerd type issues, which, you have to remember, probably the most successful application of social media in a modern Oklahoma political campaign was his application of social media. It was the way he built his network. So as I say, he's an interesting man. It's hard to be too critical of him. You know, he's being consistent, which is not something you see all the time in politics. And when you do see it, it needs to be honored, whether they're on the right or the left politically. He's strong for defense. He's strong for free markets. He's strong for Oklahoma's heritage industries, including the energy industry. He's strongly pro-business. Within the overall look at defense, strong in support of Israel. Those are not every single one of those issues that came up in his campaign, but it's things that he's talking about now that he's in Congress. And at the same time, he's a cultural conservative and has managed to convey that to the pro-life base and to other elements in the conservative wing while keeping to his message and his themes. So that's a quick snapshot. He's emerged, as I said, on the Medicare issue as almost a spokesman for the freshman Republican. He was certainly one of the handful that was actually trooped in front of the television cameras and dealt with reporters and answered questions. So you'd have to give him pretty high marks as a young leader and a guy who's sticking to his guns. And for the coming election cycle, that's probably a good place to be.
Well, he's a political novice, and it's been very interesting to watch him thus far.
Yeah, he's good in stand-up interviews, one-on-ones without a script. He's an interesting cat.
Well, speaking of politics, this week Republican National Committee Chair Reince Preibus was in Oklahoma City. So is this the kind of the kickoff of the campaign season, and we'll give this an opportunity here for you to make some predictions.
Yeah, there was just a few of us that got to spend some time talking to him, and I think what I took away from that is very articulate and very focused. He kept, as people in public life sometimes do, he kept bringing back to certain themes that he had already articulated in a speech. But having said that, he was able to be responsive to questions and not dodge responding on an issue. A good example would be the way he talked about President Obama was focused on philosophy. It was focused on what he articulated and described as President Obama's view for the country. And he, Reince Preibus, and the Republicans are articulating a very different view. For a while there, it looked like The Democrats were gaining a lot nationally on the Medicare issue, but with the continuing, mounting bad economic news, Preibus, the new guy in town, if you will, on the National Committee running it now, is bringing a very economic-focused message. Now, the Republicans in Oklahoma, of course, are very fired up, and so is he, because now that Dan Boren is stepping aside in the 2nd District, they are salivating at the chance of having, as they did back in the 90s briefly, an all-Republican, top-to-bottom congressional delegation, all 5 House seats and both Senate seats. Preibus, of course, is going to have to worry about the presidential election, and that's where things get a little murkier, although in some polls, Mitt Romney is now competitive with President Obama. It's very early in the process. You've had a lot of Republican prospects for president go away that aren't running, but you still have a field that Democrats want to describe as, understandably, as not that impressive, but that Republicans are beginning to click in with. Not just Romney, who has some problems because of the Massachusetts health care, but Herman Cain. Different kind of background, but a very conservative, almost Tea Party philosophy. Very successful businessman, and on through the ranks. Gingrich having some trouble right now.
Yeah.
But Michelle Bachmann, Sarah Palin, both bringing a lot to the table in terms of support and enthusiasm. Bachmann, if anything, maybe talking a little deeper on the issues lately. So I don't know where all this goes, but I think the Republicans are more enthusiastic than they were just 5 or 6 weeks ago, whereas the Democrats remain very confident that the president, with his proven ability, will be able to get this on track. But right now, this week, very competitive in the polling data.
Pat, thank you very much. Of course, you can read more about all of this at CapitolBeatOK.com. Thanks to you, Pat, for coming in. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.